Welcome to this webinar. And in this webinar, we will introduce the ESG Clearing House to you. The ESG Clearing House is a joint initiative from ABN AMRO, Signify, and Visma. And we see the ESG Clearing House as a pure exchange platform of sustainability metrics, peer-to-peer, metric by metric, facilitating auditable data transactions. And in this hour, we will hear from Tjeerd Krumpelman, Head of Advisory, Reporting and Engagement for ABN AMRO, from Juliette Gaussem, Head of ESG Reporting for Signify, and from Victor Den Bak, Solution Architect for Visma. And my name is Erik Breen, and I'm your host for this webinar. Let's have a look at the agenda for this hour. And this is the agenda. After some housekeeping, we will hear about the ESG Data Challenge, and we learn from the perspectives of users, from Tjeerd and Juliette. We will share our vision on the future of ESG data with you, and we will also introduce the ESG Clearing House, including a brief demo of the system we envisage. And we will have a panel discussion in which we also like to address your questions. Then what is the ESG Data Challenge? The world we live in faces urgent and also important sustainability challenges. And for a sustainable life, we need to stay within our planetary boundaries and also find the foundations of a just society. And the SDGs provide a coherent policy agenda globally to meet those challenges. And climate change is one of the most urgent, but not the only challenge. And when we look what's going on, we see that regulators, standard setters are really pushing for more transparency and more accountability of sustainability performance. And they are fighting greenwashing. And actually this week, we've seen examples from that in the press with raids on Deutsche Bank and DWS, its subsidiary, over alleged greenwashing. Investors require reliable and comparable sustainability information, and businesses feel the paradox of an increasing expectation and sometimes low trust. And accountability is on the rise. Due diligence of the supply chain extends already well beyond the first-tier suppliers. Regulation, compliance, and risk management are not the only drivers for transparency and sustainability performance. Business partners, customers, investors, and other capital providers are more demanding as well. Long-term value creation, purpose, and stewardship all require further integration of sustainability into all parts of regular business conduct. And as a punchline, we would like to say that sustainability reporting will need to get to the same rigor as financial reporting. And it's against this backdrop that I'd like to invite Juliette Gaussem to stage and to share her experience. And Juliette holds an extensive career in sustainability, and she's now the head of ESG reporting at Signify.
Thank you, Erik.
Juliette, over to you.
Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining the webcast today. So I think Erik set up the scene of what us as corporate are facing, increased regulations, increased demand of data, and that's in this context. And when we discussed originally with Visma and ABN AMRO, the idea of the ESG Clearing House came very appealing because, as Erik mentioned, we know, and that's what we hope as well, is that non-financial data will get the same level of maturity as financial data, just in a very shorter time frame. And we can only anticipate, and we already see, at least for us at Signify, the increased amount of requests regarding data. And that's become a challenge, not only to gather all this new data, but also report on this data and share this data externally. And of course, we have an annual report, but I think the idea here is like looking at the potential of the ESG Clearing House will not solve all the issues that we're facing in that realm, but really will facilitate the exchange of data. And that's bring me to my second slide. What we think this ESG Clearing House is meant to be is really a facilitator and an exchange platform, really to be able to exchange like in an automated way and therefore more efficient way all our data. And we will dive a bit more in details like what this platform looks like. But for us as a corporate, that's really this sharing, the audit trail attached to it. So all the rigor around this data that will be used hopefully by many different stakeholders. And we can see also that there is other benefits to this platform, like understanding a bit the type of request, the frequency of the request, the stakeholders asking for this data. All of that could be done also by using the ESG Clearing House. And we know, and Tjeerd will cover that a bit more in details, that for us as corporate now, it's not only sharing data about our operation, but a full value chain that also require us receiving data from our suppliers. And we have more than 3,000 components as suppliers that Signify, and we work very hand in hand with them. But we know, like for instance, climate action, we already need some elements and data from other parties that are part of our value chain. So this will also be a way for us to gain efficiency in gathering the data that is required to really showcase our ESG performance. So very much in a nutshell, like what is this ESG Clearing House is really this exchange platform. It's not going to solve all the issues that we're facing, but really facilitating and securing this exchange of data. So I'm handing over to Tjeerd to give you a bit more another flavor of what is a challenge, but from a financial institution standpoint.
Thank you, Juliette, and thank you, Eric, also for the introduction. So the perspective from the financial sector or the capital provider is that for our data sourcing and for the relevance of our data is that 95% of our total impact is in our scope 3. So that means that we will have to have more granular and better data on our clients, on the loans that we offer, and that brings us to another challenge where the number of clients for a capital provider is quite high. So Juliette mentioned 3,000 suppliers. At a typical bank like ABN AMRO, we often have hundreds of thousands of corporate clients that lend money. So we need data, granular, high quality data from those clients. And it's not only a nice to have, it's becoming very fast a need to have because of the regulatory space that we are in, both in Europe but also global. This initiative is focusing on getting better data and sharing that data in a high quality platform. But it's very relevant to have a governance around that as well, and to meet the regulatory requirements that we see upcoming. And finally, and this is a common challenge that we have with our clients and with companies like Signify as well, that there are numerous data requests, right? That there's more than one party asking for our data, and that we are not the only party asking for the data of our clients. Including rating agencies and others. So this could really help being a place where you share the data once and that relevant parties can draw on the clearinghouse to get their data. And it should relieve some of the reporting burden that we all feel. So I'll hand over, I think, to Eric to guide us through the rest.
I think it's fair to say that we do enter a new era of ESG data, and we need to look at the quality of the data and what the implications are. And I think from what Juliette and what Tjeerd both shared, we see there are some core challenges ahead here. And we've tried to summarize that. First, we think that the big question is whether the sustainability reporting landscape, and it's not just about the annual report, it's about all the exchange of sustainability metrics, is it ready to cope with the new requirements of reliability and comparability. And we see those requirements coming at us from regulation and also from investors, and other drivers are behind that as well. Another question is how that sustainability data is gathered. And what does that mean for your systems and for your processes? And not only the systems and processes within one organization, but also between organizations. How is that sustainability data being exchanged? And what does that mean also for the data processes to take account of the different usage, the purpose, the meaning, the scope, the context of the data? These become very important. And last but not least, and this is, I think, one of the elements that will grow over time, but is not so prominent yet, can we still meet the current reporting timelines? If you now publish your annual report, including financial statements, if you need to increase the quality of sustainability data, the big question is, are you still capable of, at that point in time, with the same timelines, also publish a complete report including that sustainability data? Or do you need to postpone your publication date? That's a big question. And the question becomes very relevant if you look at the ISSB consultation, for instance, in which they state that financially and sustainably material information needs to be published at the same time. And this is also, for me, underscoring the need for an ISSB and the likes of that. So that's a little bit about the core challenges, but we're here not alone. We also like to hear from the audience, and therefore we have set up a poll. It's our opinion that sustainability data will need to be at an equal footing as financial data is, with regard to use, distribution, reliability, comparability. And the question that we want to ask is, do you agree? And if so, why? So if you go to the right bottom of your screen and if you press on polls, then you can indicate your answer there. And you can choose from no, I don't agree, or yes, I agree, and we need to be compliant, or we need that high quality ESG data to run our business, or we feel the intrinsic motivation to contribute to sustainability. So it would be interesting to see what the audience has to say. And I'm not sure whether the poll has started in the right way. I think, Sicko, I'm not sure what you are seeing or looking at, but if I look at the poll and if I vote, I get an old poll. I'm not sure whether we can fix that.
I think the poll is live and is working quite well because I've seen the votes coming in.
Yes, I now see that as well. All right, thanks, Victor. Yes, we feel the intrinsic motivation. That's the most voted item, number 4, receiving about 50% of the votes, followed quickly with 32% by that we need high quality data to run the business. And I think this is a really nice outcome, and we can comment more on that during the panel. For those of you, there are 3 people I think that have chosen other. If there's anything you would like to share, please use the questions tab to share your question or your comment that we can reflect on during the panel discussion. And this is, I think, something that also brings us to a next stage, because this was really a vision why we've started the ESG Clearing House. And we believe there will need to be an increasing focus and demand for the exchange of standardized data. It needs to be reliable, it needs to be comparable, so based on standards, and it will flow from the supply chain, the second and first tier suppliers, through big corporates like Signify, up to the financial service companies, the capital providers like Cheert here represents. And so we see this whole ecosystem of sustainability data exchange that needs to grow. So this is the vision that we based the ESG Clearing House on. And we also said to each other in the early days when we got together that this needs to be based on a number of principles. If we want to make this right, it needs to be an open and an inclusive and standard neutral platform for the market and by the market. Therefore, it needs to be an open partnership with shared benefits. Doesn't mean it comes for free, but it means that we will set this up as a foundation with a non-profit status. So that's important here. And it will also be open for other technical partners to plug into and to use. The core engine of that ESG Clearing House will be open for everyone to use at a small fee, with shared benefits and a non-profit status, but that's the vision behind it. In the governance of the ESG Clearing House, we also foresee a broad oversight body of market participants, including the preparers like Juliet, the user groups like Cheert, also perhaps the standard centers, supervisory bodies, technical partners. And that's, we also need to have a certain public accountability and transparency beyond it. What we also felt is crucial and what sets us apart from other initiatives, I believe, is that the data will not be owned or stored or commercialized in any way. And this means that the ESG Clearing House will never be able to sell the data. It's also not responsible for the corporates, but the ownership of the data and the full control rests with the party that actually originates that data. So that's an important vision behind this. It doesn't mean, or it does mean that we're not going to build a big database. That's not what we're going to do. It's a pure exchange platform. And I think with that, it's a good time also to hand over to Victor. Victor, can you take us away?
Thank you, Erik. Yes, my name is Victor Den Bak, and I'm an architect at Visma Connect. And my career has evolved around designing solutions for information exchange across organizational boundaries. And I'm very happy to be part of the Clearinghouse initiative, because the challenge which has just been posted by Juliette, Cheert and Erik is a very interesting one, and was very nice to help shape a solution. For the next few minutes, I will explain to you the functionality of the Clearinghouse, how it fits in with the many use cases we have identified, and I will wrap up with a demo of the prototype. So the ESG Clearinghouse is a cloud-native platform which facilitates the exchange of ESG data between participants. Participants can be any type of organization which have joined the Clearinghouse, and we know about the identity and such, which is a prerequisite to be taking part in the information exchange. The ESG Clearinghouse has 4 major functions. First of all, there is the matchmaking. This allows participants to find each other, to initiate a transaction of ESG data, and also on the receiving end of that transaction, each participant can decide to accept or deny it. Since you retain full control of the data, you can decide who you will be sharing data with. A second major function is the data exchange, which will guarantee the safety of the data and also prove the provenance of where the data is from, which is very important. For instance, what currently is happening is a lot is being done via email, which is not necessarily the most secure way of communication. Third, there is the audit trail. For each and every transaction, an audit trail will be created, and this will provide transparency to both participants involved in the information exchange. Furthermore, it also acts as a proof of where you have gotten the data from. And now you have some evidence that you have collected data from the source, which is becoming more and more important because you will want to underpin the facts you have with evidence that it is correct and from the source. The fourth major component will be the phone book. This will allow participants to look up which organizations are participating and also which type of standards and data exchange they support. Now it's perhaps also a good moment to explain also what the clearing house is not. As Eric mentioned, the clearing house is not a large database with lots of ESG data in there. All the data remains within the sole control of the participants, and the participants decide on who they share their data with. This also means that it is ready for future developments in information exchange, which are currently being trialed, for instance, in the USA, but also in Europe. It's also important to note that the clearinghouse is not a specialist tool. It is not a carbon calculator or a tool to create a nice looking report. However, we do envision that the clearinghouse will become available in such tools, which will make it a lot easier for the participants to interact with the clearinghouse directly from their own tooling. The clearinghouse will be available through APIs, which will be available to both participants and to third-party software developers who can integrate it into their services. Now, let's look at some of the use cases and see where this information exchange takes place. When we dove into this subject, we have identified a lot of information flows, and we call this the ESG data supply chain. And we have an illustration of that supply chain here, which is a very simplified one. Thus, this example evolves around a large corporate in the center, which has supply chain partners, of which only one is shown here. But as mentioned, there can be many, many of those. And the supply chain for ESG data also extends beyond the organization, the physical supply chain of goods and services delivered. As mentioned, there are also institutional investors, but also financial institutions which rely upon ESG data for their core business. And in this illustration, you see all these green lines, which are lines where information exchange takes place. And this is where the clearinghouse can really help make the information exchange easier, more reliable, and also allows for a higher level of automation. And there are some key characteristics we see when it comes to ESG data exchange. We see that the data moves both upstream and downstream. We also see that some of these flows are less frequent and are often done manually. But more and more, a higher level of automation will be required in the future. As mentioned by Cheers, with hundreds of thousands of companies which have loans with their bank, it becomes nearly impossible to do everything by hand and by email. So automation becomes very important. And also, if you look at many contracts where you will want some ESG data as well, where you want to frequently get data points, because it's also, of course, the ambition to steer your supply chain partners and monitor if what they state about their performance is correct. That requires a lot more data points. And there is also where you see a shift from of the data points you often see right now in low frequency and publicly available in annual reports, which we call generic data, to also more specific data related to a certain contract, related to a certain loan, which could also be more sensitive information as well. And this is also where it becomes very important that you make sure you share it with the right organizations and that it is a secure exchange. Within these many use cases and these many patterns we have seen, there are two major patterns which will solve a lot of these use cases. One of them is where you carry out a data request. That means that you want some data points which are related to another participant and you ask for them. So you'll pose a question and you'll get the data points in return. Another use case is where you want to do a data offer. And that data offer is, for instance, when you have some new data points available, which are very relevant to one or more other participants, and you want to proactively inform them about it. For instance, you have some data points available, which is very useful for institutional investors, and you have like a group of 15 of those which are very which you have a good relationship with. You can inform them all at the same time with the same data points. Now, I've mentioned the data request, and this is also what I will be showing in the demo. So let me set up the demo right now, because I will do a live presentation of it. Just a second. As mentioned, we do foresee that there are multiple ways of interacting with the clearinghouse. In the future, it will probably be part of the various kinds of tools you are using in your organization. However, as the ESG Clearinghouse, we also want to provide a cloud-native web application or an app on your iPhone, iPad, etc. And we have been making several prototypes of those because we want to really test that we are creating tools which are useful and fit for purpose. So right now on the screen we see the login page of our prototype, and our objective for right now is to carry out a data request. So let's try and do that. Here we see we are logging in as Erik Breen. He is our participant for today. So we are signing in. And because we are a new user to the clearinghouse, we also get some information. So here we are welcomed to the clearinghouse, and we get some information about what the clearinghouse is. We click next, we get an introduction of what is a data request and how does it work. Let's continue, and we get some information on the data offer. And finally, we get some information about data management and how we can easily share data with selected participants. Now let's get started. What we see right now is what we call the overview screen, which is like a dashboard and is like the entry point for all the types of actions we can take right now. On the left hand side we have been logged in as Erik Breen. To the right of that we can see that we can start a new data request or a new data offer. And that is where we start those requests from scratch. But we also see we can have all kinds of templates, especially if you have like fixed groups of suppliers or investors. You can set up templates which will make the sharing of many data points to many other participants a lot easier. If we look below, we have an overview, and on the left hand side we see we have done some data requests previously. And for instance, we see we have like a group of Asian suppliers, and we have 10 responses already, and we are still awaiting 27 answers. And if we move to the right hand side, for instance, we can see an earlier request where all the suppliers have answered before. We also see that there are some people requesting some data points from us, and we have fulfilled some of them, and others we need to act upon soon. But let's get to the data request, because that's the topic for right now. So we're drafting a new data request from scratch, and that consists of several components. First of all, let's see what kind of data we want to request, and in this example we'll be asking some emission data based on the GRI standard. So we'll be choosing our standard. We will also selecting one or multiple data points, and in this example we'll take the GRI 305 series, which are emission related. Now we can send it to one participant or more. And in this case, we are using a select to multiple. And this is also where the phone book mentioned earlier comes in, because we want to make sure that we are selecting, for instance, the right organization or the right subsidiary of that organization. And that is where the phone book really helps out. And there we also need to select the time frame. And here we see the year 2020, which is fine for our request. Let's continue, because in order to send it, first we have to review it. Here we see we have 7 data points. We are requesting for the year 2020 from this group of participants. And this is exactly what we want. So we are not going to alter it, but we are going to send it. And it has been sent to the clearinghouse. And we get back to the overview screen. And in the live version, of course, we would have a new data request in the overview screen. And we could see the answers coming in over time. So this concludes the prototype of the data request. We have several of these. And the goal is to work with the end users and really think about what are the use cases, how can we improve them, automate them, get the whole data exchange to a higher level. And that's the objective of the clearinghouse. So this was a brief introduction of the clearinghouse. And I will now be handing over to Eric for the panel discussion.
And yes, thank you, Victor, for this really nice demo. We will now enter the panel discussion. And first, I would like to ask you if you have questions to find your way to the questions tab and also to put your questions for the speakers in there. We have noted a number of questions already. Some found their way in the chat section, which is fine for now, so you don't need to repeat them in the questions tab. We have questions from Cora, from Vanessa, and also from Jos. We've seen those questions and we will answer them. Also, there are questions about sharing the playback and or the slide deck. We will share that through the website of the ESG Clearing House at a later stage, and you will also receive an email with the ability to play back this webinar. But with the panel discussion, I think Cora was the first one to ask a question. And I know that Chet and Juliet had a look at the question from Cora. So what is your take on this, Chet, Juliet? And can you please briefly repeat the question for the audience as well?
Sure. Happy to start, and great, Cora, that you're here, and thanks for the question. And the question or the comment that Cora made is that, you know, just having the data does not make you sustainable. And will we give some guidance to what data you actually need or how you need to measure or steer on being truly sustainable? I understand the viewpoint, and Cora and I have known each other for a while, so I know where she is coming from. But my position would be that this is not ultimately the goal of the ESG Clearinghouse. The goal of the ESG Clearinghouse is to enable exchange of high quality ESG data. And having the data does not make a company, in my case, a bank, sustainable. It doesn't. It depends on what we do with the data. It depends on how we use it, how we steer on becoming more sustainable. So the data in itself will not do that. Hopefully, having better and more granular data on a client level and on a portfolio level will enable us to make choices and to steer in again, in our case, ABN AMRO, into a more sustainable direction. But a lot more will be needed than just having the data. Happy to hear from Juliet how she views this from Signify perspective.
Yeah, and I think Cora is also typing, answering live to your comment, Tjeerd. I completely agree with your point, Cora, with what Tjeerd just mentioned. I think the ESG Clearing has the power of this platform really to fasten the data exchange, so the information will circulate faster, and whether or not is useful information, that's for the stakeholders to say it, right? So in that sense, if the data is not good enough for stakeholders thing like how we manage a certain topic or a certain KPI, then hopefully this will enable also this feedback process and this loop of reporting, like engagement with the stakeholders. So I think that is a facilitator, helping like getting faster and more secured data points that are here to make decisions from a data user point of view, but also from a data provider such as a corporate. If the stakeholders are not happy with what is shared, then this is what the reporting loop is made about, right? So I think that's, we should see the ESG Clearing House for what it is. It's an exchange platform. We're not saying if the data would be good or not, or the data needs to be a qualitative data. That's the first entry point. But then the content of the data is owned by the data sharer, which in that case could be a corporate, could be a supplier, whatever you sit in the value chain. And that's what it is. So I don't know if, Eric, you have also a bit more, but I think that's would answer. And I think Cora answered that the language is important. Indeed, sustainability, ESG data position are the same in my view. Tagging the data, or could be a way forward. Yeah, I think we all agree, and it's a great suggestion. So thank you, Cora.
Thanks, Juliette and Geert, for providing your insights. I agree. I've not much to add here, and don't want to labor the point. We need the transparency, but steering on sustainability goes beyond just transparency. But it's necessary. I also saw there were questions, actually multiple, in from some others about the connections that we make. The connection to, for instance, World Favor was asked for, and also about the standards that we support, the SASB standards and other standards were asked for, whether there was an overview of that. And I think, Victor, that would perhaps be a question for you.
Yes, the idea is that the clearinghouse will be standards driven, because that will be making information exchange in the supply chain much easier. And fortunately, we now have multiple standards which are getting to a higher level of maturity and also getting to a higher level of convergence of using the same terminology or merging all together. The idea is that we will support the standards which the participants are using, and it will be probably multiple standards at the same time. So we are looking now to start off with what we call some of the major global standards, such as GRI, SASB, VRF, EU taxonomy, greenhouse gas protocol. That's just, let's say, an initial set. And also based on the requirements of participants, we will probably be extending the standards supported. We will be looking at, we need to, of course, keep a balance between supporting as many standards as people are actively using, but also supporting everything reduces the standardization. So that is where the governance and the participants will come in. And I think in the future there will also be sector-specific standards if these are really necessary for data points, for monitoring contracts, etc.
Thank you, Victor. And perhaps to add a little bit to that, 2 points actually. The clearinghouse really likes to take a metric by metric approach. And we believe that is extremely important because a number of metrics reoccur in different standards. And as an example, we'll take the greenhouse gas protocol, which is referenced in the draft CSRD documents for the European standards. It's also referenced in the ISSB drafts for the global baseline, and in a number of other consultations that are currently out there as well, SEC being one of them. And so we can reuse the existing material. And that's important on a metric by metric basis. The second point I would like to make, and that's where really the user perspective comes in, is to prioritize how deep we need to go. Because if you take the same example, the greenhouse gas protocol, you can drill down to the invoice that you get from your energy suppliers to get to scope 2 data, for instance. But you can go even down further, certainly if you talk about scope 3. And so how far do we need to go down, and which metrics do you actually want us to support? That's where the user participation will be extremely important. And perhaps I think we are also programmed for another poll, and then we can also talk about the structure of the clearinghouse and where we're at the moment, because that's also important. So let's look at another poll about what the audience finds, and then also return to the other questions that we still have. So here's another poll, and if I can ask you to go to the right bottom of your screen, to the poll section, and there you can answer the question what you think is the most important challenge to tackle in gathering ESG data. We all believe the quality should be up, but what aspect of that quality is it actually that we need to get up? Is it all, or is it one of the 4 listed here? The reliability, comparability, completeness, or the timeliness? And if I look at the answers here, I see that all gets most of the answers now, 73%. And the other 4 are a little bit split. But I think we see there's the most support for all. So all are important, and we do see some have very specific elements that they would like to see supported, but it splits over 3 of them. Timeliness is the least voted for. All right, and then I think we were programmed for talking about structure, but if you don't mind, I will come back to that later, because there's one important element that I believe we should share with you at this point, and that's where we're at. How far is this initiative? In which phase do we are? And I'm not seeing Geert on screen, but if I can ask, just hold on, please. I'm missing a slide on the phasing, but I know, Victor, you can speak to the phase we're in.
Yes. Currently, we are in the initiation phase. We are exploring the challenge, testing the ID, and we are currently looking at which are the use cases and what do the organizations in the market want, because it's a market-led initiative and we want to get as broad as few as possible. The idea is that later on in this year, we will start up in a more like prototype setting with the information exchange and really scale up from next year onward. So that is those are the rough timelines. So currently we are testing all the prototypes, the use cases, because this is a new initiative and it's also a new problem or a new challenge many organizations are encountering, and we really want to make sure that we are providing an actual solution which really makes the life easier for these organizations and all the experts involved.
And I think I can add, Vanessa asked the question on how many financial institutions have already showed their interest. To be very transparent, this is the first outreach webinar that we're doing. So for now, the aim is to look at the interest also from financial institutions, because ideally for me as a corporate as well, anyone will go through this ESG and ask only from there. So I only have one source where to share the data and based on the request. There is different companies and financial institutions that showed interest, nothing very formalized yet, because that will be the next step, as Victor mentioned, of the outreach. So the objective also with this webcast is like, either an interest also from you presenting the call, there is different way that we could also see your contribution. So whether it's a funding, and I think we can touch upon that as a later stage of this webcast. But for now, this is where we are, very transparently and honestly. This is the beginning of the journey. There is already the platform. We have done testing between us, but we want also to test it with a bigger crowd. So you're very welcome to join the train as we go, and see like if there is any other financial institutions that should also be interested in that regard.
Thank you, Juliette, and welcome back for Cheered. You had small issues, but you're back now, so we're very glad to have you here again. And I think Victor and Juliette and Cheered, if you look at the operational phase we're in right now, you mentioned we're in the initiation phase. What do we actually need, and what's already there? Can you perhaps comment on that? What will be the next steps, and why is it so important that we now have this webinar to pull the interest?
Shall I start?
Yeah.
While the laptop is still working. I think the phase that we're in now is we need to get more companies on board, right? We need to get more interest. And we've brought it to this level together with Visma, Signify, and ABN AMRO, but obviously we need more participants, and we need feedback and input on how to develop this further. But so having some companies, I saw a question in the chat on other financial institutions as well on board. We are in conversation with several of them. And it is a common challenge, right? So I think Eric mentioned that at the beginning. The data challenge is very much a common challenge for all sustainability-related people and companies. But for now, at the short term, I think we need more companies. But welcome, Victor and Juliette, your input as well.
Yeah, I think that's summarized a bit what we've discussed before. It's important, I think, also to mention that this is what we come up with these three parties, but it's still the early stage. So what's the different way to contribute could also be to contribute also by shaping what this ESG Clearing House will look like, the governance. This is all the things that we are discussing now, and that's why we have this webinar at this moment, to really, for anyone interested, like continue and helping us shaping what that ESG Clearing House could become. So this is a good time. Eric, I see a question from Leo. What is the advantage for companies to upload the data? Maybe I can take this one.
Yes, please go ahead. And can I ask Victor then to have a look at the question from Simon?
Sounds good. It's true, there will have to be an important motivation to the start. So from a corporate standpoint, like what we see the value of the ESG Clearinghouse is like a center place, assuming that everyone asks through the ESG Clearinghouse, but center place when we have requests that we can just answer in an automated way. So that would be the next level of exchanging data, is like really centralizing all these requests in one place, having just to press a button or to look or to, there could be different ways, and Victor explained that quite clearly, of how to push the data out there. There will be an audit trail, but that's also, I think, a force like to incentivize any other stakeholders to use this platform. So as soon as this platform will be up and running, that would be a great place also to invite our investors or the ratings agencies or to use this platform. So the main advantage for me is time, time saved. Like if anyone could use this ESG Clearing House to request data, that would also enable much more energy efficiency for corporate like Signify that has many data points and has many stakeholders.
Thanks, Juliette. Victor, can you take Simon's question? And then afterwards, I think we would be good to talk about the structure as well.
Yes, thank you. I think that's a good question because I think what's happening on the with these standards is very interesting, especially also from a point of standardization and automation. So what we see is many of the standards that are currently emerging, converging, are becoming more and more mature from a content perspective, but also from more like a technology perspective. We see, for instance, more and more use of XBRL and taxonomies, and that means that much of the standards and the data points will not only be human readable, but also machine readable. And if you want to get to a level of automation, and quality controls, etc., this is really a very important enabler. So we are really looking forward to that. Perhaps some of the people in the audience already know that we do lots and lots of message exchange, many millions and millions every day actually. And many of those are well structured in XBRL. And many of the tools we have also allows, for instance, to use those files to pre-fill reports, etc., which really makes life easier for the end users. And I think that if you see how much more ESG data is to be exchanged, even in the near future, removing that much manual labor and freeing up the expertise to tackle some of the problems and really be able to use that expertise for creating insights and steering towards a better outcome. I think that's very valuable for companies to take that route.
Okay, thank you, Victor. And let's now talk a little bit about the structure of the clearinghouse and how we look at that. Juliette, how important is the common nature of the clearinghouse to you? You're on mute.
I'm sorry, I was on mute. Yeah, so let me restart. I think it's very important to mention and that's a common market-led initiative. So really coming from the need from the users and the data owners. So that is very important. The other very important and one of the core principles that when we discussed at the beginning of what the ESG clearinghouse should be is that it has to be there for the common good. So the idea of having also the clearinghouse as a non-profit was like a no-brainer for Visma, ABN AMRO, and Signify. And of course, we need to develop a sound governance. So this is what the governance can look like. But of course, that's under constructions as well. So any new funding manager joining now also have a say to this governance. We want this clearinghouse to be kind of an open source, to be used by as much as many of us out there. One thing also with the clearinghouse, and I think we can discuss that afterwards, is that in order to be sustainable, it has also to be sustainable financially. So it's not going to be free, but for the users. So that's also something that is important to mention, that the costs related to that are not, I mean, depend also of the people that will be joining in the ESG clearinghouse. But I think Eric will touch upon this one a bit later. I hope that answered the question, Eric.
Yes, I think so. I think in the participation, it would be good to share the benefits and also how participants can join. Tjeerd, can I ask you to speak to this one?
Yeah, so what we mentioned earlier is we're one of the goals of these webinars is to share what we're doing, but also to invite you to join us. and there's various ways of joining or getting involved. One is as a company, as a corporate, or as a financial, join us as a partner. Another way is to give us feedback and use your knowledge and experience and guidance to give us feedback based on what you've seen so far, or some introductions to other companies that you feel are relevant or would be interested in this development or in this innovation. And of course, at some point we will reach out with a funding request. So for now, this has all been funded mainly by our time and effort and by Visma. But if we want to grow this to a serious scale, it will require some funding. And I think Eric mentioned already, this is a not-for-profit foundation. So this is not but we will be making costs. So at some point a fee will be charged. But for the immediate term, what I mentioned earlier could be very helpful.
All right. Thank you so much, Tjeerd. And I think it would now be good also to poll among the audience if they indeed wish to become involved in the clearinghouse. And we all hope, of course, that you say yes, please actively involve me now. But I'm sure you have not been waiting the whole year for this webinar to indicate that interest. You might have other things. So if you want to postpone a little bit, we can contact you later. And that will be a second option if you are interested. At this point, we mainly seek the interest from corporates or capital providers. If you're not, but if you are interested in joining, also for funding, expertise, or whatever you want to contribute, also please contact us. But then we would like you to choose option 3. But let us know and reach out via contact forms on the website or otherwise if you want to join us in another way. And if it's completely useless for you, then option 4 is for you. So if I can now ask you to vote, if you have not already done so, then I think if you go to the poll section again, then you should be able to vote there. And I'm very glad that we see good indications of active involvement, and we will reach out to you if you've chosen that. And also, some of you are not representing a corporate or a capital provider, which is perfectly fine. But if you want to get involved in any way, please reach out as well. And some have other priorities for now, but want to get involved later. And we will certainly contact you before the year is out. There are few, fortunately, that indicate it's not useful for them, which is perfectly fine. We're not all in the position that this can be useful, so we won't bother you. And I thank you for your vote. Then I think we near the clock of 11, and the main message of today is that we would like to reach out to you to say we are here. This is the ESG Clearing House initiative. It's in an early stage, and we want to develop this together with the market. The most urgent need we have now is to get you involved. So we like participation. We also like your expertise, and we need some funding as well. It's not massive, but we do need some. And this is the ESG Clearing House. At this stage, I'd like to thank Juliette, Tjeerd, and Victor for their contributions. I'd like to thank the audience for their interest and for their commitments, and I hope to see much more of you. Thank you for now. This was the webinar on the ESG Clearing House, and please help us spread the word. The website is there. And without further ado, I wish you a good rest of your day and a nice weekend ahead of us. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you all.
Thanks.
Thank you very much. Have a nice day.